Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. Armand Hillman never claimed to be the only person or the first person to be able to read these ancient Greek texts that say what they say. I'm going to show you that even you, yes you, can do exactly what Armand Hillman and what I'm doing in this video. And then I'm going to show you a secondary source that proves Armand Hillman was not the first person to ever claim the things that he's claiming. So let's kick this off.
I was not the first. I would say I was the one who took the big picture of it. I was the first one to bring the science side
Who was the first one?
over. Carl Rock. He said they're using something in the Eleusinian mysteries. Don't trust in what I am saying. Check it. Go to the sources. That's all. This dude's doing it.
So as you heard it from Armand Hillman himself, Carl Ruck was the first person to bring this to light when he said they were using something in the Eleusinian mysteries, and which we know now they were using pharmacon drugs all over the ancient Greek sources. And then you can hear right here in this stream that he did, don't trust in what he is saying, check the sources for yourself. And I've shown that I've done that, and I'm showing that I'm going to do it again, and I'm going to show that you can do it yourself. You don't have to rely on Armand Hillman. He's done amazing work to bring this to light, because the people who were supposed to do that, the philologists and the classicists that were sitting there for years and years doing absolutely nothing, they didn't do their job. He did. So I'm going to show you how you can do it as well, just by reading the sources. So this is the secondary source that is very important because it was written before Armand Hillman got his PhD. So he was still studying when this came out. And this cites a person called Jeremy Bentham, who was around in the 1800s. Well before Armand Hillman was alive. And what Bentham says in this book is exactly what Armand Hillman was saying about the same passage, Mark 14, 51, 52. So it shows this was talked about before Armand Hillman was even alive. So what's the book called? The Man Jesus Loved. Homoerotic Narratives from the New Testament. Now this is by Theodore Jennings and its publication was 2003. Look where it's from. Claremont School of Theology. So a theological school in their library has this and they are using it to study text about the ancient Greek sources of Jesus, of the New Testament, and what was happening in these Gospels. Okay, it's not fringe. It's not Armand Hillman's own fringe theories and conspiracy theories of what ridiculous people have said to try and cover up the biblical narrative that they're trying to project. Now, Armand got his PhD in 2004, and this was published in 2003. So this was out before Hillman was out talking about any of this stuff. And let's look at what it says. You can check this yourself on page 114. In John Here's at the Cross, they're saying the man Jesus loved, disciple, the student that Jesus loved is at the cross. Right here, John 19, 26, 27. In English, therefore when Jesus saw his mother, the disciple whom he loved, standing there. Now, what does it say in Greek? The words that I want to pull out here is disciple, which is mathetein, which I'll show you actually does not mean disciple. It comes from Latin. It means a student or a pupil. Because mathetes right here, a learner, a pupil, Latin, discipulus. This is where we get disciple from the Latin. But originally, mathetes is a student or a learner. There we go, a student. And the other word I want to look at is hegapa. Because what does this mean? And you go to the verb agapao, which means to greet with affection or to be regarded with affection. Generally love. This is what they're using, the man who Jesus loved. And interestingly, it says especially of children. Paidas, a child. This is the definition of this word here, the disciple whom he loved. Now this is important because I'm going to show you the exact age of the apostles. And they were not adult men. Because right here in Matthew 17, 24 to 27, in the Greek up the top, I'm going to use that just to show you the words do not quite mean what you think they mean in English in this translation. But I'll read the English for you right here. So when they went into Capernaum, they had to pay the tax, the didrachmas. And what did they say? Doesn't your teacher pay the didrachma? He said, yes. And then we get down to it. Jesus says, what do you think, Simon? Who do the kings of the earth receive toll or tribute from? Their sons or from strangers? So their sons means not adults, because it says the sons are exempt. Go fish and find some money, take that and give it to them for me, Jesus, and you, Peter. Okay, it says that right here. And now also it says at 27, you read 27, hina de me scandalisomen. That means in order that we do not get scandalized. And it says in this English translation, but lest we cause them to stumble. At the bottom, hanti hemu kaisu. Now what does that say? For money paid. Only for Jesus and Peter had to pay the tax. Now how do we know that they were under the age of 20? Because the people who had to pay the tax were only adults and they had to be of 20 years of age or above. Because Exodus 30, 13, 14 says they're talking about didrachms. So that's what we're just talking about, the payment that had to be made. Now, when you look at 14, it says, everyone that passes the survey from 20 years old and upwards shall give the offering. Okay, so you have to be 20 years old and up. That's why Jesus said, only pay for me and you, because Peter was of age, looking like he would have had to pay the tax, so at least 20 years old. But all the rest of them, the other 11 disciples, apostles, didn't have to pay the tax. So we know that they didn't look 20 at least. So they would have been at least 19 and below. That's what the text says. Now, the next part of this book, The Man Who Loved Jesus, says, in Mark, the youth is nearly arrested with Jesus. Okay, we've looked at that and we'll look at it again. But this next bit says, and in both cases, he is described in ways that suggest homoerotic attachment within the world of Hellenistic pederastic culture. That's this book saying that in 2003. Now, what is pederasty in ancient Greece? It was a practice mainly associated with the upper class, where an older man would be in a relationship with a younger man, usually in his teens. Some scholars locate its origin in initiation ritual, which, if you've watched any of Lady Babylon and Armin before, yes, it is all connected to the initiation rituals, particularly rites of passage on Crete. Now we're going to look at an ancient Greek original source which says exactly this about Crete. This is from Timaeus, and it's a fragment from the 4th to 3rd century BC, before Jesus. And it says, Paiderastein, which we've looked at before, Paiderastes, the pederasty, Creton, right there, Crete, Estus Hellenas, into Greece. So we don't need just Wikipedia because we have an original source as well that backs this up. And we know Paiderastes is a lover of boys, mostly in a bad sense, according to the lexicon, because Jesus says, I'm not a laestes when he's arrested in Mark 14:48. And laestes can also, according to another Greek lexicographer, this word. Now, this next bit is going to talk about Jeremy Bentham. So we want to look, who is this dude that came out in these 1800s saying this stuff? Now, Bentham was an English philosopher, jurist, social reformer. When was he around? This is the most important thing. Born in 1748 and died in 1832. So he was asserting this back in the 1800s, well before Armin Hillman ever came to this earth and said any of this stuff on his YouTube and on Danny Jones. So this isn't what I've heard other people say, Armin Hillman's interpretation, or the satanic interpretation, or no one's ever said this before. Okay, they have. Now we'll go back to the secondary source, and it says, in his work on Jesus, Bentham himself indicated another incident in the Jesus tradition that suggested to him a homosexual relationship, or at least the inclusion of something like a gay interest. The incident is that of the youth who escapes naked from Gethsemane after the arrest of Jesus, as briefly described in the Gospel of Mark. This is talking about Mark before Armin ever said a damn thing about it. In order to examine the scene more closely, I'll quote the text in full. I will quote the text in full in ancient Greek because I've done it so many times. And here it is, Mark 14:51-52. Kai neaniskos tis sunekoluthei autoi peribiblemenos syntona epigumno. Kai kratusin auton. O de katalipon ten syntona gumnos efugen. Straight translation. And a certain tis neaniskos, youth, which is also a servant, young man, servant, which can also be in our modern terms a slave. Sunakaluthe was attending to him, not just following. He was attending to Jesus like a servant or a slave would attend to someone, while he was clothed with a sindona, a linen bandage, upon gumno, his nakedness. And they arrested him. He then, katalipon, he left ten sindona, the bandage, and efugen fled gumnos naked. That's the straight translation from the lexicon. You can go check it all yourselves. And I'll just pull up one word from that, which was sunakalutheo, which is the verb, to show you. It says he was following along with or closely accompanying. He was following to attend to Jesus. He was obeying, to be involved with. He wasn't just standing around. Now you got to remember, what was Jesus doing at the time just before this? And we'll take a look at that. He was stumbling in the garden while he was in anguish and amazement. That's not a normal reaction for someone who isn't on drugs. Now the key point here, after they quote Mark 14, is Bentham's own suggestion regarding this youth is that he was a kenitis, or boy prostitute. It says neaniskos, used of a young attendant or servant. Now in our modern parlance, what is an attendant or a servant? You would call that a slave, wouldn't you? Paidiske, feminine version of paidiskos, a young boy or slave. See, neaniskos. Now this is the biblical lexicon BDAG. A young man functioning as a servant. This is when he's in Gethsemane. You can see up here, second line, first word, Gethsemane. And he's with his mathetais, his students. And he is ekthambestai kai hademonein. So he is sorely troubled or dismayed, and he's in anguish. And then ekthambeo on the bottom, to be amazed and astonished. So what could be putting Jesus in this state of being sorely troubled, anguish, and amazement? And he falls over in the garden and he's in this state as well, while a youth is attending to him. Let's not forget, a youth, neaniskos, is attending to him, and he's wearing a linen bandage upon his nakedness, while Jesus is in this state right now as he's about to get arrested. So I'll show you some ancient Greek definitions of a neaniskos and an ancient Greek definitions of what the word is for a kenitis. So first, let's take a look at neaniskos. Now this is an ancient Greek source, 2nd century AD, so around the same time the Gospels are being written. This is a contemporary text with the New Testament, and it says the neaniskos sunon. Okay, what is he doing? Sunemi. This is the verb. He is to be with, to be joined with, to be engaged in business. This is very similar to sunakolateo, to be closely accompanying. And number 2 here, what does it say? Have intercourse with. So it can mean to be sexual. It can also be fellow travelers. Then you also get down number 4 and 5, have dealings with and take part in, attend. See, it says attend down the bottom in number 5. So it's kind of like sunakolateo, by attending to Jesus. So that's what a neaniskos does. And we've looked before in Lucian, a neaniskos is a servant. He's serving someone. He's serving Jesus. He's not standing around doing nothing. The Greek tells you what he's doing. The English does not. The English translation is poor, and it does not explain what he's actually doing. The Greek original does, and it's showing you he's attending to Jesus like a servant or a slave would. And now this is an ancient Greek lexicographer, so someone who's looking through the ancient Greek text and saying, what do these words mean? And they're making another dictionary or lexicon to define what these words meant. And it says akmaios, neaniskos. And what is akmaios? In full bloom, at prime, vigorous, in the prime of strength. In Roman numeral 2 down the bottom, in time, in season. So I've shown this before. It's talking about being in your prime, in season, fresh, young. That's what they're describing a neaniskos. And now it also says sphrigon. So what is sphrigon? Sphrigao is the verb, and it means to be full to bursting, to be plump, well, especially of, you can see right there. Now it says too, sphrigon is generally of young persons, to be fresh, vigorous, full health and strength of young persons. We're talking about youth, teenagers. Look at number 3. Metaphorically, full-blooded, swollen with passion or pride. To swell with desire, be at heat. We're touching on sexual terms here because it's talking about a woman's breasts and being at heat and swell with desire. Another one, Elias, 2nd century AD. Talk about neaniskon, uk acharen, which is neaniskon, youth servants are not acharen, without grace or charm, not unpleasant and disagreeable. He is pleasant and agreeable. That is an attendant or a servant. They're pleasant and agreeable, do what you say, and they're graceful and charming. And then you got Sappho there talking about an immature girl. If you're going to say Bentham didn't specifically say this kenitis isn't a child, well, it says a youth. A youth is around teenage years. And let's look at what a kenitis actually is in ancient Greek by ancient Greeks themselves, because the LSJ, the lexicon definitions from the Oxford Victorians, do not give us what we need for these definitions when we're looking at sexual terms, because they wanted to always put it behind the Latin, because they didn't want to define these sexual acts because it was morally staining for them. They didn't want to define them. So let's take a look at what a kenitis is in ancient Greek. It gives to kinaideia, unnatural lust. Then we also have unnatural lust. See how ridiculous this is from the Oxford Victorians? Unnatural lewdness, obscene things. Kenitis, down the bottom one. This is what we need to look at. The Latin pathicus, and we have katapulgon, which is the same thing. Now it says lewd fellow, obscene character. What is a kenitis in Latin? Now it's derived from the Greek kenaidos, used to describe a gender non-conforming male who was perceived as effeminate and preferred the passive role in male-to-male sexual acts. Now you look down the bottom with the etymology. It comes from Greek roots, kenaidos, which we saw, which initially referred to performers or dancers known for sexually suggestive rhythmic movements of the hips and buttocks, the ancient definition of twerking. Now it's also said pathicus there in Latin. Now what does that mean? Submitting to sex, or one who assumes a passive role in intercourse. And then a literal meaning in usage goes to a man who submits to anal or oral intercourse. And broader translations, catamite, sodomite, passive homosexual. We have another ancient Greek oration talking about kenitis and moikos and thaumastos, wonder working. Now, what is moikos? Because we've looked at moikos before, and it comes from the Didache, which is the apostles themselves book that they all wrote, that says do not do this stuff. So a moikos is an adulterer or a paramour of a sodomite, okay? Idolatrous person. Idolatry is sex, according to the apostles in their own book, the Didache. And a paramour, not to be confused with the band, is an illicit, secret, or unofficial romantic and sexual partner. That sounds like a youth servant, doesn't it? And neoniskos, because he runs off, he flees naked, so he doesn't want to be known. He doesn't want to get caught. Then we have another two ancient Greeks talking about what a kenitis is. And it says in Julius Pollux, kenitis, pornos, bedeluros, which is pollution, katapulgon, which they referenced before in the ancient Greek lexicon of the LSJ. Then we also have down the bottom, aselges, aiskrugos. Aiskrugos is what we've seen before. That is fellatio, which I've shown numerous times on this channel. And then we have aselges, which I'll show you as well, which is right down the bottom. And in the middle, right here, is hesychius, kenitis, aselges, pornos, just like Pollux says, aselges and pornos. Aselgeia is to behave licentiously. Okay, what does that mean? We're going to take a look. Aselgeia, licentious, wanton violence, lewdness, lasciviousness. Aselges, licentious, wanton, brutal, lascivious, lewd. What are these definitions? It's so difficult. Now you got to go through so many different languages. You got to go through Greek, Latin, English, just to get a straight answer out of these Victorians. So let's do that. Lascivious, someone or something that expresses a strong, often inappropriate or unrestrained desire for sexual activity. So a kenitis is by definition sexual in nature. Licentious is a person or their behavior that is sexually unrestrained, immoral, or completely lacking in moral and legal discipline. Now, if you're thinking about the moral and legal discipline of the Victorians in the 1800s, good God, that's why it's hidden behind Latin so many times, because they didn't want to define what these things meant. It wasn't just rude to define these things back then. It was like off limits. You do not talk about this stuff unless you absolutely have to reference it, and then you put it in Latin, or you use words that people have no idea what they mean. It's referring to uncontrolled, promiscuous behavior. Can we get a better definition, please? Because pornos in the top there is Greek, and it goes into Latin again. Catamitus. What is a catamite? Now, this is a very good definition. Catamite is a term historically used to describe a pubescent boy or young man, neoniskos, who is the passive partner in a sexual relationship with an older man. Most commonly refers to the practice of pederasty in ancient Greece and Rome. Thank you. Finally, we get some kind of a straight answer. And look where the reference is in the origin. The word derives from the Latin catamitus, which is the Latinized form of Ganymede. If you know anything about Ganymede and you watched that Danny Jones episode with Armin Hillman, that first one, he references Ganymede. And what does he say? If you want to rule, you have to drink from Ganymede's rectum. That's what this means. And who was that? He was a beautiful youth, again, neoniskos, in Greek mythology, abducted by Zeus to be his cupbearer and companion. Now we're going to take a look at what does a cupbearer actually mean, because as you'll see, they were making the human body into a cup to be used as an antidote. And that's not Armin Hillman just saying that. I'm going to show you other people that are actually saying this. And in the historical use of this word catamite, in ancient context, it specifically referred to the younger, receiving partner in a relationship with a man. Okay. Now we also get two other Latin words up here, scortum and paidico. Let's go to paidico. Paidico translates to performing intercourse or committing sodomy. It is a highly vulgar, offensive, and sexually explicit term frequently found in Roman, erotic, and satirical poetry. Let's look at the bottom. Etymology. The word is generally derived from the ancient Greek paidikos, meaning of a child. Over time, it was absorbed into Latin as slang for pederasty, as we saw. Now let's go to another Latin definition, scortum, to define pornos, ancient Greek. What are they saying? Widely used as a derogatory term for a prostitute, both male and female. Ancient Roman texts frequently use it to mean a prostitute. And then at the bottom, derivatives The diminutive form, that's what we're talking about, neaniskos, is a diminutive of neanias and means smaller, little. And scotilum means little leather or a young prostitute. So there we have some definitions from ancient Greek, Latin, and the lexicographers from Victorian England defining what a canidas is. And you can see the similarities to a neaniskos. And the final one I'll bring up, a canidas, from, I think this was a 12th century text, Hos Dionysos, of Dionysus and Aserges. Dionysus is a canidas. Now, if you're sitting there thinking, how did we not see this before? How come it's taken until Armin Hillman brought this out for all of us to see any of these sources and this information? Why was no one talking about this? Well, people were talking about it, but very, very few, because as we saw, only one source, the secondary source, Jeremy Bentham, was saying, hey, it could be a canidas, what we're talking about in Mark 14, 51, 52, with Jesus and the naked boy, naked youth, servant, slave. But people did know about it because, as I've just shown you, the Victorians who were writing these lexicons, they were writing what all these words meant. Yeah, sure, they were doing it behind Latin because it's all sexual. They didn't want to define it properly, but they were still reading these texts every single day and writing these entries. So they were looking at them. They just weren't putting them out there because it's the 1800s. You think people were ready to hear, hey, Jesus was arrested with what could have been a canidas? You're crazy. You're crazy if that was ever going to work in the 1800s. So the people who were writing the lexicon did know about this stuff, but there was no way that they were able to get any of this out until the 21st century now. And now we're going to take a look at why we don't actually have anyone speaking about this. No classicists are actually coming out and saying, yeah, this is true. This actually means this. We can back this up with evidence and sources. I mean, I can do it. I'm showing that you can do it right now. Recently, there was a podcast that just came out, an interview, a talk between Avina Vrioni, who studied ancient Greek and classics in Athens. Stones and Serpents did a video where they had Avina and Armin Hillman having a conversation about these sources and why they haven't actually come out until now. So in this first clip, I want you to listen to what she says about the Greek church and what they're actually practicing, and if they actually know what they are doing.
Everything that is heard nowadays in the Greek church is that koine, the language of the New Testament. It's ridiculous, in my opinion, because people still don't understand it. We've already talked about the disconnection of modern Greeks from ancient Greek language. So I find it ridiculous because most people go to church and they don't even understand what's happening.
So she's talking about, okay, New Testament is written in Koine, which we looked at, Mark 14, 51, 52, the one I translated for you. When you go to school in Greece, they actually teach you ancient Greek in your high school years for 4 years. And then you can go on and keep learning ancient Greek, or you can go into the other sciences if you want. She went on to ancient Greek. But she's saying, yeah, people don't actually know, like the church, the things the church are teaching in Greece, they don't even know the Koine. They know a modern version of the ancient Greek. So it's not the same. They're not teaching or they're not reading the New Testament as it should be read in its original ancient Greek. They're reading a different version of it. And she said it's, quote, ridiculous what the church is doing. And now in this clip, we're going to take a look at why no one has actually ever read these sources. Because where the fuck has everyone been? Why haven't these sources been out there before Armin Hillman brought it to light? Where are all the classicists that are supposed to be teaching us this?
Can I ask you, have you had much of a chance to look at any of the medical or drug stuff or the theriacs and stuff like that from Nicander? You know, has any of that kind of stuff come up in the past? Traditionally, that stuff is not taught in American universities. Have you come across any of that stuff along the way?
You're right. It is not taught not only in the US, but nowhere in the world, I think. Maybe you're one of the few people that have the privilege to analyze these texts.
Now we know why no one has ever come out with this before, because they don't teach it. What does Armin keep saying? No one reads these texts. He's not lying to you. No one reads them. Or maybe like a couple of people who do a dissertation here or there, or do a translation here or there. But it's so rare, they don't actually teach it. You got to do a specialization that you're interested in to go and read these works. Because as she said, no one teaches it around the world. That's why we haven't had it. We're going to look at another clip, which is what Armin Hillman said, I've shown before, on Danny Jones, what the head of his classics department said when he wanted to go and get his dissertation. This is what the head of his department said. After he had put all these hours in, all these years for doing a dissertation, his PhD, reading these sources personally, this is what the head of his classics department said.
Take out the chapter on recreational drugs or we're not going to give you the degree. I met with the head of the department. She said the Romans just wouldn't do such a thing.
How ridiculous is it that we are sitting here 20 or so years ago, you've got a head of a classics department saying to a student who's getting their PhD, I don't believe that the Romans would have done that. When he's sitting there with all the sources that you haven't fucking read. You see how frustrating this is? The classical professors that are supposed to teach this stuff don't actually read it, and when you've got a student who brings a dissertation to grade for a PhD, they tell you,
the Romans just wouldn't do such a thing.
What? That is someone who doesn't want to look at the sources. They don't want to look at them. They don't want to believe what they're hearing. That is not science. They might as well be doing biblical studies, because I showed even in my Cleopatra video that PhDs haven't read these sources.
The most likely way for Cleopatra to kill herself is some sort of poison. How that was applied, I think we don't know.
Professor Classics, PhD, Harvard. Pharmakoi epichristoi. So this lady here, Prudence Jones, a professor in classics, said she doesn't know how Cleopatra applied the pharmacon, the drug that killed her. And she's a PhD in classics, okay? This is a person who hasn't read the sources. Just like the head of the department of Armon's University hadn't read the sources when he brought them to her. This person is a PhD and hasn't read the sources she's claiming to be a professor on in a TV show about Cleopatra's death. She didn't even know. So what did I do? I brought up Strabo, who was alive at the same time Cleopatra was, talking about, right here, with a pharmakoi epichristoi. She Christed with a drug. Because right here, and we're going to go through all the sources again on Christing because it's so ridiculous. Because even me, I'm showing you, even I could do this and show you a PhD doesn't know what they're talking about and hasn't read these sources when I have. How bad is that? That's so fucked up. Pharmacon is a drug. And how was it applied? Epichristoi, with a Christ. And epikristos means to be smeared on. And it's referencing the pharmaca, the drug, here in Strabo. This isn't Armand Hillman. This is a text from a geographer called Strabo who lived in the 1st century BC, the same time as Cleopatra. Now let's just do it again. All right, let's do this again for people in the back who don't fucking listen or have never read these sources, even though they're professor in classics. The term Christ, Christos, means to be rubbed on. Anoint. I'm sick of hearing anoint. It's from Old English and it means to what? To rub on. Anoint means to smear or rub. Don't worry about the sound you're making with your mouth. Anoint, okay? Don't worry about that. Or Christos. Don't worry about what the word is you're saying. What is the definition for what it does? To be rubbed on. Rubbed on. What is anoint? Rubbed on. The same definition. I don't want to fucking hear anoint one more goddamn time. Pharmacon is a drug, and it's referencing right here 3 separate times in the ancient sources. You can look at all this for yourself. Euripides Hippolytus, which we've looked at before. Pharmacon Christon. It says, is the drug a Christ? Then we have an epichrist, which is the Strabo, which I just showed you with Cleopatra. Epichrist, upon her skin. Then you have an enchrysting, which means you put it inside, and you usually do that into the eyes, which I'll show you. But we got 3 references to drugged Christing. Now we also have, which we'll come to later, a pharmacon, the phi right here, pharmacon, soterias, which means a salvation. You have a savior in a drug. Now let's just punch through the sources. Arti Christos, fresh spread, pharmacon, drugs. Epikristos, smeared on, drugs. Diachrisma, this is from the LSJ lexicon. An unguent salve, it's a form of a Christ that you apply. Diachristos, anointed. Take out anointed, say diachristing, you would say in English now. Diachristos just means Christed. Diachrio is to besmear, to Christ all over with a thing. Doesn't matter what it is. Could be oil, could be drugs, whatever. Christ all over. Phaedra, Euripides Hippolytus. Poltera de Christon e poton to pharmacon. This drug, which of the 2 drugs, because you go front and then back in this line, which of the 2 drugs is it? Is it a Christ or a drink? So in this case, the Christ would be the drug. Diachristeon, one must Christ. En Christos, rubbed in, eis tus ophthalmus, into the eyes. John 9:11 references this. Epi Christen mu tus ophthalmus. Epi Christed my eyes. Jesus epi Christed someone. And we've looked at this before because Jesus has what? Has a Christ. Because in that red circle right there, Jesu Christoi. It says in the Christ of Jesus, because Christoi is a dative, and that means to, for, by, within, or at. And Jesu means of or from. So that would mean Christoi in Christ of Jesus. In the Christ of Jesus. Now you understand what that is. It's his ability to spit on the ground, mix earth and spit, and then epi Christ someone's eyes. That's his Christ. Now you get it. And how is this not just Armin Hillman? Because this man, Dr. Korshi Dosu, received his doctorate in ancient history from Macquarie University. That's here in Australia. And he was talking about the Greek magical papyri. We've looked at that before as well. And we're going to take a look at what does it actually say. Because we just looked at Jesus Christing someone in the eyes. And this is Korshi Dosu, chapter 8 from one of his books, Medea, the Magi, and the Memorandum of Aeetes. Notes on the Mithras liturgy. It's actually Mithras, but Mithras liturgy. This is what it says. Look at just in the red. Text ends with a detailed description of a plant named the Kentritis, with which the eyes of the co-initiate are to be Christed. So he uses the word smeared, but it's the same thing. And what is the word in ancient Greek? Christed. Anointed is smeared. Christed is smeared. Okay? And we're talking about the ancient definition. It says you Christ the eyes of an initiate with a plant in this liturgy. And this is not Armin Hillman. Now we're going to look at a clip from a History Channel thingo with Bettany Hughes on Asclepius. Okay? Very interesting, I saw. Has nothing to do with Armin Hillman.
This earthly paradise was sacred to Asclepius, god of medicine. This was one of the first ever health centres.
They also came desperate to be cured. There are all these medical instruments that were found on the site, which are basically just the kind of precursor of our surgical instruments today. The ancient Greeks were massive pioneers in medicine, and actually our word pharmacy is basically an ancient Greek word. It comes from pharmaca, which means drugs.
Thank you, Bettany Hughes. See, she's saying it's drugs. Thank you. Finally, someone who has a brain, who is on TV, doing an ancient history show on ancient Greece, talking about ancient medicine, is bringing up pharmacon, completely independent of Hillman.
It might have been a music ritual, or even a snake pit, or some kind of dungeon where people imagined that they were dead so that they could be healed and reborn again.
Where have you heard that before? Yeah, I've done a video on that with Rogan and Brian Murescu and Hancock. He's talking about going into death and then being reborn. That's what Eleusis was about. This is what we've looked at before. And even Bettany Hughes is saying this. This is what the temples of healing, the temples of Asclepius were doing. People going into the dark with serpents. She said people imagined that this would happen. But what they're actually doing is using drugs. She just said that. So you go into a death state and then you come back out. Or you go and use the drugs, the medicine to heal you. And then you come back out reborn. Like, that's what she said. Not Armin Hillman. And the next bit is from, I think it was History Hit. It's another one on Medusa. And how this does relate to what Armin Hillman was saying on the first Danny Jones podcast. And I connected these two and you're going to see how.
Athene takes 2 drops of blood from Medusa, one from the left-hand side of her body and one from the right. She gives them to the god of healing, Asclepius.
They're thinking of making the human body the producer of the drug. They're looking at using multiple drugs to create the potential that the human body has to make its own communion. Theriac is a multi-drug component that's used to balance, poison, or death bringer, they call them.
Drop of blood from the left-hand side of Medusa's body is lethal, a deadly poison. The drop of blood from the right-hand side of her body, the Greek word is soterian, savior.
What did I just show you? There was a pharmacon, soterias, which is the drug of salvation. She's saying the same thing about Medusa's blood. There was one side of it from her left side was deadly, and the other side, from the right side, was a healing drug.
The Greek word is soterian, savior. It can revive you from the dead.
It's the pharmacon soterias.
So like an antidote?
Exactly, an antidote. The balance of the one that can kill you with the one that can keep you alive.
What's the point of that?
To die and to be born again.
Bettany Hughes said it, to die and to be born again with Asclepius. The lady before on Medusa said, one drop of blood was death, and the other drop of blood from the other side of the body was life. Die and to be born again.
Did you know there was a savior before Jesus? Yeah.
Medusa has always been the monster who could save us.
Medusa is the Soter, according to this, not Jesus. Now, this poor girl on history here as well. Look, you can see the crucifix on her neck, and she's a historian, and this question is hilarious because the way she answers it, oh my god. This poor girl, oh my.
Did Greek priestesses do drugs?
Oh my god, look at her, she's fucking absolutely lost. And then she goes on to say like, oh, maybe there was a gas main, a natural gas line at Delphi where the oracle was huffing fumes and was getting high. She's like, that's been debunked. I'm like, okay, great. So I feel sorry for her because she's an historian. She's never looked at the sources, but that's another point. A historian on YouTube getting asked, did ancient priestesses do drugs? She doesn't know. She's never read the sources. So I'm going to bring them up for you right now. What is the word manteia? Because the oracles were priestesses. And what is a manteia? It is from prophesying, being a prophet, divining, divination, oracular, so the oracles, an oracular response, prophetic, an oracle. Manteomai, bit of a digamma, to divine, prophecy, thanaton, it also says there, death, manteoi, to divine death. And it says also divine, divinations. So that's what manteia is. And we know that a pharmaca is a drug. Are there any entries in this lexicon that speak about manteia using drugs? Diviners, oracles using drugs. Well, look at that right now. Pharmacomantis means either one who is at once pharmakos, drugged, and mantis, oracular, one who uses pharmaca to divine from. This historian has never read the LSJ, because if she had, she would know the sources say right there what a pharmacomantis is. And now I am going to use a clip from Armin, Dr. Hillman, PhD classics, because I don't see anyone else on YouTube bringing up these sources and actually going into them and reading them at sight, because they've been doing it for 30 plus years. Yeah, no one. Even Luke Gorton, who's been doing it for 20 years, doesn't do any of this stuff because he doesn't know it. He even said that on the podcast with Danny Jones and Armin. He's never read this stuff. So let's have a look, because it relates to ancient priestesses using drugs.
Look at this. This is the pharmacomantis. Look at her right in the face, right? We've got Medea here. It's that potion of Black Death.
That first word, hokumoron, that's in the accusative. Now, hokumoros, in the nominative, it says quickly dying, dying early. Now, number 2, bringing a quick or early death. And then you can see here, it's cut off, but you go down here. Pharmakon dunamis. Pharmakon. It's referencing drugs.
She was taught by Hecate.
Hecate. If anyone knows about Hecate, it's a priestess. They call her a witch, but she's a priestess, okay? And what does she do? Teknesastai. Pharmak. Teknesastai is from tekne, which is an art or skill. So she taught art or skill of pharmak, drugs.
She was taught by Hecate. She was taught drugs. Not just some of them, all of them. Pharmacomantis. We're looking for her medicine, lady medicine. What'd they call her over in Italy? Angitia, snake queen.
The snake queen, Angitia, that is her name, because they were using serpents and the viper venom in their drugs. It's not his fault that he's the only one that's reading them, because no one else is doing it. Or no one else can do it the way he's done it. But he's not now, because there's myself and there's other people on YouTube who I know who are working with the Greek, doing a much better job than me as well. We're working now to read these sources and to be like, okay, bring it to the people. What does it actually say? Because as Armin says, it's not his thing. It's not his source. It's everyone's sources now we can look at. You can go on these websites and look at it for yourself. Don't trust in what Armin's saying. Go and check it. It's exactly what I did the first time I heard what he was saying on the first Danny Jones podcast when he came out. I was like, let me check it for myself, because that's the kind of person I am. So I went to that website they pulled up. When I first went to the Perseus Task website and I saw this top one here, Christos means to be rubbed on, I was like, oh my God, that's it. It's right there in the source right there. It says to be rubbed on. What does anoint mean? To be rubbed on. Christ is a drug, and it is the application of a drug. And I've shown you that so many times now. It says it right here. Christon pharmakon. How do you use the pharmakon? You en-Christ it. You epi-Christ it. People who are sitting there saying Christ has nothing to do with drugs, and they post the fucking AI bullshit about, oh, it means anointed, all this stuff about anointing kings and Mashiach. Bullshit. It's right there. How more plainly obvious can you be? Arti Christos means to freshly spread a drug. There we fucking go. I can do this, you can do this. Any of us can do this. It had nothing to do with Armin. So I'll post a link to the LSJ with Pharmakon. You can start there and you can start clicking links and do exactly what I did. I'll link that below. Start now.
When a dude makes a video like this robot, why can he do that? Because it's not my thing. Don't trust in what I am saying. Check it. Go to the sources. That's all. This dude's doing it.